All right, thanks, Nabil, and thank you, Terminal, for having us. All right, so we have lots of interesting topics to talk about. So I guess we'll start off by, you've seen lots in the Valley, you've seen lots here. Do you find that there are some similarities or differences that are occurring across the board between whether it's ideas, companies, or founding teams?
For sure. So I specialize in working with startups that are at the very early stage, which can be an area that's challenging because you don't have a lot to go on. But when you're looking at early stage companies, in my opinion, there is absolutely no difference between the quality of companies here versus what you're seeing in Silicon Valley. I think where a lot of the differences start to come out is as companies grow and mature and the access to resources that folks in the US have versus the resources that Canadians have. So that's when you start to see a lot of disparity. I think in Canada we're getting a lot better at making sure our companies are better funded and have access to better talent. But I think one area where Canada actually stands out, that we have a leg up on Silicon Valley, so to speak, is the fact that we are, and we hear this time and time again, I mean, we see it in the room, we're such a diverse nation. And what's starting to happen in San Francisco is investors there are starting to really look outside their own ecosystem because they realize their markets are completely getting saturated. And they're purposely spending a lot more time in other regions around the world and making a conscious effort to invest globally. And in Canada, I mean, investors are coming up to Toronto, to Vancouver, to Montreal, and Waterloo and other regions and spending a lot more time here. But I think what's particularly unique about the founders here is that the founders in Canada are not necessarily just Canadian. They've come in from countries all around the world, and they come in with knowledge and insights about problems affecting regions all around the world. They come in, they're able to tap into top talent and team up with top individuals here and build companies not just for our market but for markets around the world. I think we really need to harness that a lot more. I think that can really set Canada apart on the global stage when it comes to tech innovation, and I think the Valley and other regions are starting to recognize that, and that's why they're starting to spend a lot more time here.
Right. So from an investment perspective, I know there's been some talk around, in Canada, because there are a lot of government funding agencies and a lot of opportunities there, and people tend to focus on grants or those type of things to get started, whereas kind of in the Valley there's more money floating around, so they kind of go for it and take the leap of faith. So for entrepreneurs who kind of have this idea that it's easier or faster to get money in the Valley instead of here, where maybe the Canadian investors are a bit more hesitant or a bit more do higher due diligence or expect more revenue. What do you have to say to that?
It's a fair comment. There definitely, you can't deny the fact there's a lot more money there. There's a lot better valuations in many cases there. But honestly, I mean, even as an investor with my investor hat on, the number one advice I give to companies is your best form of investment is your revenue. So really focus on what matters. I think what ends up happening with companies is they celebrate investment a lot more than they should.
Right.
And investment doesn't equal success.
Absolutely.
Revenue and growth and a lot of other more tangible goals do. So I think, we as a society have kind of, created a little bit of a bias there, and I think companies naturally feel like they have to go chasing venture money in order to succeed, but that is absolutely not the case. I think revenue is your cheapest and best form of financing, and government grants, why not, right? There's no stigma against that. If you're getting free money, great money, go for it. So I would just, as a startup founder, take all those labels, be done with them, and just do what works for the company and focus on, what are your goals? And if your goal is to make a big company and be profitable and make cash, focus on that.
So are you seeing, do you find more diversity in ideas in a particular region as well, or, in addition to the founding team, or are you do you start hearing similar ideas from one place or one region and then others kind of start popping up?
It's a good question. I mean, being affiliated with a fund that is very global in nature, even if I think I see a unique idea, once I talk to my global team, I realize pretty quickly it's not. it's been done
Right.
100 times over around the world somewhere, and here's all the pros and cons to it, right? So you can get a little bit deterred by that, but at the end of the day, the hardest part of being an early stage investor is recognizing that it's, 80% of the time it's not about the idea, it's about the execution of that idea. So you're really investing in the people and trying to go after, the founders that can bring this idea, deliver on it, exactly. Yeah. Which I'm sure in your world, you're competing in AI and robotics. It's
right. Yeah. I mean, in that realm is a little bit interesting because there are many kind of applications out there where you can apply AI to accelerate or optimize existing processes. I find that as any entrepreneur, you kind of need to find a niche or something that no one else is doing. For us personally, it was a lot of companies were targeting any software, so kind of the more white collar jobs, so to speak, the back office kind of automation of software. Whereas we kind of saw a lot of opportunity or less work being done in the real world. So applying AI to robotics in a variety of settings across manufacturing and supply chain. So I think as an entrepreneur, the last thing you want to do is to go into a highly competitive space and drive your profits down, right? So no one wins in that scenario. So yeah, I think yeah, there's lots of opportunities out there. It's just a matter of how do we, I guess, open up the eyes and minds of entrepreneurs to see what the pain points are. And earlier we were talking about, it's a matter of, it's not always you can just go into a hole and come up with a brilliant startup idea and execute. A lot of the times, timing is a key deterrent.
Yes. Timing, absolutely. Timing is probably the number one, apart from the founding team, the next biggest thing that I personally look at is timing, right? Just the other day, I came across a company that, what they're doing makes so much sense, but I couldn't stop questioning the founder on, I don't think the market's ready for this. Right, and that, you see that happen time and time again, where companies that started don't quite make it, and then a competitor comes in 3 years later and overtakes the entire market, right?
And they take kind of all of your research you've done, and they kind of take your know-how, and they just,
Absolutely. So, and as a founder, that can be really tricky, right? How do you keep the wheels greased just enough to kind of wait for that market to catch up to you? AR, VR is a great example, right? It's not quite ready for mass market. You see all these companies getting so much funding in it, or for it, just to stay up with the R&D and just be ready for when that does come to light. Sometimes it never comes to, to light.
Right, exactly.
And then, so this is all part and parcel of sort of the...
And then kind of what do you do? Because you've already kind of built it, but then, so do you scale down the team? Do you sell? Do you wait? So there must be a lot of different areas you guys invest in, it seems, kind of across the board. So are there particular areas that are kind of emerging over the next 5-10 years that you're really looking forward to?
For sure. AI is a big one, right? It's the hottest thing.
All right.
Every company, a lot of companies try to sneak those words in. I think 2 years ago it was all about blockchain.
Oh yeah.
That would get snuck into every pitch deck I came across. Now it's all about
AI, blockchain, medtech, health tech startups. It's like.
But that is exciting, particularly because my focus is Canada, and we do have very strong talent here. And so how that all sort of plays out is going to be really exciting to see. AI specifically today that I'm most excited about is the low-hanging fruit, right? It's kind of taking very much to what Quali is doing. It's taking a lot of existing process and just wrapping a level of automation around it, right? You may not necessarily be displacing jobs or displacing humans, but you're sort of shifting them around and getting them to be more of a knowledge worker versus a physical worker. So that is the most exciting. And then I think there's a lot of research going into sort of taking AI to the next level. Now, whether or not we'll see that in my lifetime, I don't know. Whether we'll truly see, you probably know the answer to this better than I do, true AI, think for yourself, robots. I hope to God we do.
The Hollywood type.
The Hollywood type. So, the ones that freak us out and attack us, I don't know.
Yeah, Hollywood has not been friendly in terms of creating AI movies that really makes us feel optimistic about the future. There's one movie called Robot and Frank. I would encourage you to watch that. But yeah, exactly. Like I guess I see it as kind of what you're describing. The Hollywood type is more the general AI, which is kind of not necessarily human level, because I doubt that we want to create the full gamut of human intelligence and systems in order to be productive with our technology. Like, for example, I don't think we need to build in the robot to feel hunger, right? It's like, oh, I need to go charge myself, because, so there are some things that are kind of unique to human that we don't necessarily need to build in, and then there are others, more important, I guess, logic and reasoning, causal effect type of reasoning that we should be looking into more. And that's kind of the area of research that us at Quali AI we're trying to tackle. So, but apart from that, then you have the narrow AI, which is essentially 100% of all AI that we hear that are out there that are in practice today, whether that's like powering your search engines, recommendation engines, your level 1, 2, 3 autonomous driving currently. So that's all. I would say that's actually maybe 99% all supervised deep learning, where you require vast amount of data. So a lot of the times you have to sift through and clean up your data in order for it to optimally train your neural network in order to have good results. And then there's kind of the other end of the spectrum, where you're applying narrow AI in the more common sense, like we're leveraging a lot of human input, so human in the loop data. So autonomous driving is actually a good example, because a lot of companies actually right now are working on teleoperation of vehicles. So if you think about your delivery truck, maybe a majority of the time it's on the highway. So that part will become automated fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. And I think especially as soon as 5G comes online in North America as well, we're going to see a lot of that being teleoperated to a certain extent as well. And then so you're kind of left with humans doing the first mile and the last mile. So yeah, kind of like you said, we're not going to see the full jobs go away, but we'll see percentages of it. But even if we are removing 10, 20, 30% of one job, that's kind of goes across the board. And then now, so the key question as well that comes up is, how do we retrain mm-hmm. workers? How do we make sure we are moving forward, allocating our resources correctly and distributing wealth correctly? So that's more kind of on the more political and social side. And I think Canada and US are doing different things around the world. China, Russia are also doing other things. But yeah, I think in general though, I'm fairly optimistic, because at the end of the day, we are just becoming more productive as a society. These things that, when I walk into a facility, the turnovers are fairly high. Like, these are kind of jobs that are really none of you in this room, I'm sure, you want to do. But yeah, kind of look forward to the future and what's to come.
That's a great way to put it, that we're advancing as a society, making it more productive, right? So we can focus that time and energy on other things.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And kind of to what I was telling you a bit earlier, like our goal is to kind of expand our horizon a little bit. We don't have to replace jobs here on Earth. We can create new jobs out in like asteroid mining, building houses on Mars, things like that, where it's like now we're expanding into new possibilities and new frontiers instead of competing with ourselves here at home. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
there's a new Hollywood movie.
I know, it could be let's make a script.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, there's lots going on. We're definitely, I think, moving into a time, an era where it's going to be rapid advancements, rapid displacements, rapid training, so there's a lot going on, and we're already kind of crumpling a little bit, because we hear a lot of, mental health concerns arising, especially recently amongst, youth and adults. So I guess, have you seen that kind of in your line of work? Because I know you guys are also go.
Yeah, talking about, when I spoke about funding being sort of glorified when startups raise money, just starting a startup is glorified, I think. And I think do so much. The job that a founder does is sane. And I mean, if there's any founders in this room, I'd be curious to know, did you know what you were getting into before you got into it? Or did it seem like this, oh, I get flexibility, I get this, I get that. I mean, there is all of that goes into it, but to grow a big company, if that's your goal, it is an insane amount of work. And I think the expectations being off is what ends up leading to a lot of mental health issues for founders. I, on a very personal level, have had a very love-hate relationship with social media as of lately. And I think we are actually on a macro level starting to see massive shifts in social media, where people that have been users of it for a decade or more, for however long it's been around, are starting to see the insane negative impact it's had on their lives, right? The people like me, I'm just on the cusp of being millennial, remember life prior to social media, and I can now witness the impact it's having on me negatively every time I open up a social media app, right? For founders of companies, you're comparing yourselves to everything going on out there. For individuals, you're comparing yourself to everything that's going on out there. So that's a great example of an area where I don't know how much social media will withstand in our society. I think we're going to see it drastically shift. I think a lot of what social media is today has been sort of almost like psychological warfare, right? There's been a lot of interesting tactics used by these companies to get us addicted. And it truly is it's a form of addiction, right? Our smartphones are forms of addiction, right? I mean, I'm the biggest culprit. I can never put it down. So I think we're gonna have to find ways to retrain ourselves. And I think we're on the rise of this, where we're gonna have to start to see, start to retrain ourselves on just taking control away from that to really better control our moods and how we're reacting.
And do you see solutions kind of emerging as well? Companies?
On the periphery, I mean, you have to remember a lot of the negative consequences of this stuff are what drives money into companies. So until until incentives get better aligned, I don't think we'll see some really bold solutions to tackle this. I think it's going to have to start at an individual level, where the individual and the consumer is driving this change, to say, I refuse to engage with this anymore because I don't like how it's impacting me. I don't think it's necessarily going to come from a innovation or company level. Right.
Or even is technology going to even solve this problem that's caused by technology in the first place?
I know. Well, that's why you're seeing so many more movements toward mindfulness. It feels like mindfulness is almost the new form of religion, right? And a lot of it's being driven just to counteract the effects of technology and social media and all of that. So again, it's starting at a very individual level. I don't know how that's going to take shape, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we probably would all want to see, of course, we want to be productive as a society, but at the same time, we need everyone to take care of themselves so that, we can kind of appreciate life as well as, working hard. And I think that's part of the mentality here. And I would say even more so, like, for example, I know, like, in China, they have a 996 or something crazy like that, where they it's the average or expected for you to work 12 hours a day and 6 days a week, and sometimes on the Sunday too. So and I think part of that is driven by a mentality that's been ingrained in that culture for so long that they recently came out of, I would say only in the past maybe 40 years or so, that they kind of embrace this market economy, and they've kind of been just getting out of that state where now they're just powering through because they know what it felt to be a certain way. And for us, we kind of have we're in a different state. We of course, we value work, and we want to have, having strong work ethic is something that is, of value to our society here as well. But at the same time, are you finding that, because a lot of companies do promote, staying at the office. You see Google kind of feeding their employees or making it easy for them to stay longer. What do you think that is? How do you see that kind of playing out? Do you see companies kind of retracting from that a little bit?
I do. I do see companies starting to retract from that. In fact, I know examples of companies where their teams are entirely remote. They don't have any offices whatsoever, and they've actually been quite successful. There's that one company, Envision App. I think they're the best example of it, where their entire team is distributed.
Right.
And I think they'll do maybe 3 or 4 team retreats a year to bring everyone together to build camaraderie. But it's a great example, and it proves that it works, right? I think at the end of the day, if you define work not by a time block where you have to be in the office between these hours. Because when you define work in time blocks, then people are constantly trying to find ways to, like just get out of it, or if I'm not there, I'm not working. And it's sort of, it's not the right approach to work. I think what companies need to do is define work in terms of goals.
Right.
When you're hired, here's your goal. Figure out how to do it, when to do it, where to do it. That's up to you.
Right.
But that's your goal.
Right.
And then you can, you start to see this blend of work with family and personal life and work, and it all sort of intertwines. And for some people that may actually be a lot harder. But I think overall, as the world gets so much more fast paced, I think that flexibility will actually really enhance productivity as well.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think throughout maybe across all economies and all, maybe people will start thinking like this, hopefully. So but I guess, have you seen many examples of, or I'm not sure how much you travel into other areas, because I know 500 you guys are kind of across the globe. Are you noticing any other commonalities, in work-life balance, or like the future of work and what that's starting to look like elsewhere?
It's a good question. I was just chatting with somebody the other day about, I don't know if anyone here is from Vancouver, but are you from Vancouver?
No, but we have an office.
Oh, you have an office, okay. I was chatting with someone about the Vancouver ecosystem, and they were complaining about how everyone shuts down at 4 o'clock. Or, well, I'm exaggerating. Maybe I'm not exaggerating. I don't know. I've never worked there. But they were saying compared to other big cities like SF, New York, Toronto, the pace of life is a lot slower. And, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Are they not accomplishing as much, or have they figured out the right sauce and the secret sauce or the right formula? I don't know. We need some more macro research done on all this to sort of determine what's the right balance. But the individual I was talking to was complaining because they felt like they've had a lot of losses in the tech ecosystem, and this was the result of it. But maybe their mental health levels aren't as high. I don't know. So, but there are lots of examples of ecosystems where work-life balance is very different, and then you see the pros and cons that come as a result of that. So it's so hard to say. Again, I think it just comes down to a very individualized level, and also what the company's expectations are and the culture that they want to create for themselves. And what are the company's goals? Do we want to be $1 billion company and rule the world, or are we okay being a $100 million company and sort of a nice lifestyle company for everybody involved, right?
Right, exactly. Awesome. Well, I think how are we on time? We're okay?
We're 30 minutes in, maybe 10 more minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions at the point.
Sure, okay, sounds good. So let's talk a little bit more about, because I think everyone's a bit more interested about like what your kind of job entails, or what's kind of like the life of an investor. So tell us about the best and worst part of your job, maybe.
Oh my gosh, yeah. The best part is just, it's a very, oddly enough, it's a very people-driven job. So, you're talking to amazing, interesting, brilliant people all day long and hearing about their ideas and trying to add in little nuggets of helpful advice along the way that you can. I think there's a little bit of a weird power dynamic, obviously, there is between founders and investors, but I think that's really starting to shift. In fact, I was just telling someone the other day, I think the venture world in the next 10 years is going to be very different than what we see it today. I think founders are going to own a lot more, or take a lot more control and have a lot more of the power in terms of who they want to invest in their companies, and the investors are going to sort of be chomping at the bit trying to get their money into those companies.
Is that right? Yeah.
So that's the fun part. The hard part is trying to keep yourself honest, because when you are running a fund, you are making decisions today, but you don't know if those decisions, meaning the companies you invested in, are going to perform. You really don't know that for about a decade out. So you're hoping and going on a wing and a prayer that you're making the right choices, and your feedback loop is an entire 10-year cycle.
Right.
So you got to keep yourself honest and in check, and just remind yourself. I think what makes a good investor is not that they know anything more or less or have a crystal ball. I think it's luck plays a lot of it. I don't think you'll hear many investors say that, but I'll be the first to say it. Luck plays a huge part in it. And then just sort of, believing in yourself, and same way a founder believes in their ideas, believing as an investor in those crazy founders, and just going along for the ride and doing what you can to support them.
Right. That's interesting what you said earlier about, having the entrepreneurs having a bit more control. Why do you think, what is the reason behind that partnership?
Well, because the industry's changing such that now you're seeing a lot more repeat founders, right? Second, third,
Right.
fourth time out, and their cadence is very high. Their likelihood for success is very high. They've been there, they've done that. And so what typically sets a really good venture fund off from a not so well performing fund is actually access to these top companies.
Right.
Having the stronger networks and being able to write a check into some of these better performing companies is what will set you apart. So if you just don't have access to that deal flow as a fund, you're going to have a hard time generating those returns. So yeah, for a lot of these second time, third time, fourth time founders, they're picking their investors, right? And they're the ones who are, choosing it. So as this industry continues to mature and evolve, and a lot more companies exit, and a lot more founders are sort of repeat, you'll start to see that dynamic continue to shift even more. Do you see that, or are you starting to witness that as a founder?
A little bit. I guess maybe I'm a little biased because I guess kind of to the tune of what you said, as I am maturing as a founder, as I'm on my second company now, I become a lot more choosy because, money, you start seeing kind of money can come from a lot of different places, not just VC. Customers, of course, is king, but you have a lot of private investment as well, industry kind of partners who align with you in terms of where you are going, or potential, like, for example, a lot of we're working on AI software to drive robotics, so a lot of the hardware companies potentially partners who are interested in investing. So there's a lot of money everywhere. It's you have to kind of be strategic about it as well. But of course, if there is a VC or someone, I think it's all about the team as well. Like, can you see yourself working with these individuals specifically? Because you will be for many years to come. And do you guys get along? Things like that. Do you guys have the same vision? So I think all of that taken into consideration, there's just a lot more that I think about now before I even think about taking money, or is it just better to try to get more customers, right, and fund through revenue? Sometimes that's doable in certain situations. Other times you want to scale really fast and you want to grab more market share, then that's not necessarily the right strategy. But yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
All very personal decisions, right? There's no right or wrong answer.
There's
fortunately.
absolutely no right or wrong answer. And I think, I think good entrepreneurs will always find a way to make it work, despite what kind of happens. I think it's to you a lot. I agree with the luck point. Sometimes it just so happens, right? You just align that you happen to meet this person who knows this person, and they just happen to be looking for this, and so there is a bit of that.
Yeah,
as well.
for sure. I mean, I will say, I think the number one reason I see companies that fail, number one reason is team issues, team dynamic, management issues, and it just creates too much pressure on the culture, on the rest of the team, and things implode. The second reason is the timing reason, or external factors. One of Google, Amazon, or Apple come in and erode your space, or things like that are out of your control. So those are the two biggest reasons that I see companies fail, and a lot of those you can't really account for. You can't do diligence on that prior to investing, right?
Right. Do you guys see more B2B or B2C companies, or does it not matter?
I mean, Canada definitely is biased toward B2B. There are very few investors here that will invest in B2C. But 500 as a fund is very open to B2C. So the few that we do see in Canada, I think they're great, but I really encourage them to just go south of the border and at least get the learnings from down there, because
Right.
they are up against, they're in an uphill battle if they're trying to launch that in Canada. Definitely more enterprise software businesses.
Right. I guess I'll ask one last question before we let the crowd ask some questions. Has there been, or if you can disclose, what's like one company maybe you guys recently looked at or invested in that you're really excited about?
Oh boy, let's
Pick one of your children.
oh boy. One of my children, let's see. Okay. I'll tell you about a company, one of the few I invested in, which was an idea on paper, which is rare, but sometimes you just fall in love with the founder's idea and you just, oh my gosh, here's a check. Off you go. So this was a company called Chatter, and Chatter is trying to, you know when you guys shop at like the Gap or any of these restaurants and they give you this receipt and they say, fill out the survey and you could win. And you're like, really? Like, what's your hit rate on this? Their hit rate is 0.01% actually on that online survey, and yet they all pay money to these survey companies to be able to get in this customer feedback, even though they're getting 0.01% of the customers responding. So Chatter is trying to essentially eradicate that and make the conversation happen via SMS and make it happen sort of in context in real time. So the moment you leave the retail location, let's say you get off of a plane, the airline has all of your information, including your phone number, and they can contact you as you're waiting for your luggage and say, Marylin, how was your flight today? Mind if we ask you a few questions? So they're leveraging a lot of bot technology and really riding the trend of users feeling a lot more comfortable engaging with corporations via text. This is kind of the rise where we're starting to put our walls down and allow corporations to text us because we do find it convenient. And then customers actually are able to, not take their rants to social media. That's sort of the biggest gripe that corporations have, is trying to keep the negative comments off of social media. They can nip that in the moment when a customer is feeling upset. Then they can sort of take that feedback in and resolve it right away. That's the bigger sort of play.
I see.
So anyway, so what started off as an idea, they're now doing fairly well. They've launched with, I think, 20 or so quite big retailers all across North America, and I hope to see their solution being used everywhere because I think it's brilliant.
It's awesome. You bet on a team.
I bet on a team.
Yeah, that's right.
That was their hit or miss. So
Sounds good.
yeah, great.
Awesome.
Cool.
Great. So I guess we'll turn it over to the audience if you guys have any questions.
If you could just repeat the questions back, that would be.
Sure.
Yep.
I have a question. Since you've seen a lot of venture capitalists, I'm wondering if there's a personality type for these venture capitalists. Are they more like present-minded, risk-averse, or are they futuristic, kind of Ray Kurzweil type of people? I don't know. I'm just curious.
It's a good question. Did everybody hear that? It's what's the archetype, basically, of a
Yes.
venture capitalist? I think if you asked that question maybe a decade ago, there would be an archetype, but I honestly don't. Like, I often get people, asking me, well, what's the formula to get into VC? And I have no answer because I don't think there is a formula. There's no sort of like, if you're an investment banker, you go do your MBA and you get a finance background. There's no sort of stepping stone to get you into VC. It's filled with people that are either founders themselves, or people with sort of eclectic backgrounds that are, they've been immersed in the tech industry. Maybe they're finance, maybe they're not, maybe they're engineering, maybe they're not. And I think as a result of that, it's really filled up with a diverse group of people, and I think that reflects on the funds that you see. Some funds are very, they're a lot more conservative, and some funds are willing to just bet on a wing and a prayer. So I think that's a result of the makeup of the fact that it's filled with people with all sorts of different backgrounds. Yeah.
How do you find VCs and where do you find them and what does the relationship look like? Is it can you 3 months and then hours, or is it do people keep shifting and hoping?
The question was,
Where do you find them and how do you approach them?
how do you find VCs? So I think most of the VC funds are listed. Like if you were to search online, there's like directories within Canada, like the CVCA, Canadian Venture Capital Association, and in the US they have the, I don't know, USVA? I don't know. The equivalent of the CVCA, where they've actually got sort of a listing of all the funds that exist in the country. And then it's just, to get in touch with them, the best way is typically to see if you have a common connection. LinkedIn is great for this, to see if you have a common connection to anyone that works at a fund and just get introduced. That's honestly the best way. Because as you can imagine, they're getting hit up all day long with sort of cold calls and emails and LinkedIn messages. So if you can get a...
There are no platforms really, like online platforms that are maybe AI powered or something where you can find that's worked well for people that you know of, maybe in modern day?
To actually like
Get
get an introduction or...
to find VCs or to find investors, like an app or maybe a platform that's becoming popular just to find...
There's platforms like market research platforms like PitchBook, for example. They've got listings of all the VCs and what companies the VCs have invested in and how much money did they put in and how much money is left in their fund, and those, you have to pay for those. But
There's AngelList. You can probably
AngelList.
go, that's a free service.
Yeah.
If you connect with like an innovation center, like a Mars or a Community Tech, they're usually plugged in pretty heavily. They'll have like a list of 50 to 100 investors that usually come in and out throughout the year. So, and then they'll also help you validate your startup idea. So it's like a good place to start. Yeah, I guess we'll go over here.
Sure. So you talked about how the feedback loop is about 10 years for you to evaluate whether or not you make a decision. What are you doing in the meantime to make sure you're not making the same mistake or missing out on something?
You keep investing. So the question was, your feedback loop is 10 years, so what do you do in the meantime to make sure you're not making the same mistakes? You keep on investing. You don't really stop, but the interesting thing about venture is your future decisions are sort of as good as the past data that you've seen, and so you're constantly taking in data and sort of analyzing it and then seeing how that worked out and then using it to make future decisions. And it's this constant feedback loop. Even if you don't know the result of the company, you're getting a lot of data in terms of how quickly are they growing, how are their management teams doing, how is their hiring going, was it a good idea to do X versus Y? And so you're using that to help propel future decisions and to refine them, if that makes sense. Yeah.
For every successful startup, how many fail?
A lot. A lot.
Depends on what you count, I guess.
Depends what you define as success too, right? For a fund, a return on capital, so if I invested 100K in you and you gave me 100K back, that would be considered a failure. But to you, that might be considered a success. So for a fund, you're looking for at least minimum 2x return, up to 100x, hopefully. But in terms of how many companies shut their doors, surprisingly, it's not that high of a number. I would say less than 50% of the companies that get funding actually shut their doors.
Yeah, and not all startups or companies will go for funding either, right? There are a lot of very successful small, medium-sized businesses that are out there that just do not have the scale profile to go for VC because they are looking for that 10x plus. So it kind of depends on what you're defining as. What?
Nope, sorry.
You both, it's nice to have these perspectives, different perspectives than the usual sometimes. I want to ask you about when you think about the Canadian like innovation ecosystem, and Neha, you mentioned there's a lot more investment in Canada undoubtedly in B2C, or sorry, B2B, B2C. Which we all know it's a lot more conservative than the Valley. Let's say more growth stage checks than really early stage. It would seem that if you're not investing really robustly, let's say at the angel at the C level, you're just limiting the number of questions you're funding, and that would impact ultimately innovation, the amount of darts that you throw to the board. Do you think that's true, or do you think there's a strength in just investing on the B2B growth side, or do you think it's really hurting us, in looking at innovation?
I think it's really hurting us. Yeah. I've actually had talks with anyone who's willing to listen, the media, whatnot, to say the top of our funnel in Canada is drying up. A lot of what happens in venture is, I won't get into nitty-gritty details, but the way funds are compensated, you're better off raising a large fund than a small fund. If you raise a small fund, you are taking home literally next to nothing in terms of salary. So all the funds that start, their goal is to continue to grow bigger, bigger, bigger. But when you grow bigger, bigger, bigger as a fund, it is very hard to continue to invest at the early stage because you're just not writing big enough checks into those companies. So as a result of that, our ecosystem has matured, which I think is a great thing, but there's not enough new funds being generated. There's not enough capital at the top of the funnel, I call it. And because, like you nailed it, we're conservative by nature and we're not throwing enough darts around to say, I will invest in X, Y, Z, and let's just see what happens. Who knows, right? I think it's hurting us. I predict in 3 to 5 years, a lot of the later stage investors are going to be like, where's the pipeline? Where are the companies, right? So TBD, but.
Sorry to kind of actually add to this topic and just a lot of things we've discussed here. How do you feel about, like, so I understand that this is a venture capital fund, right? And then there's also revenue sharing model. And I think just recently I personally learned about Clearbank and their dilutive fund models. And I guess that could also impact the ecosystem because they're funding mostly seed stage startups like e-commerce that are turned down by VCs. So how do you think that affects the ecosystem and your fund?
It's a great question. I haven't really put much thought, to be honest with you, in terms of that specific model. I mean, I know Clearbank is operating as a separate profitable entity. So I don't think their goal is necessarily to help or hinder the ecosystem. I think they're just, they're operating as, it's a for-profit. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. It's a great question, though. I'll give some thought to it, but I haven't thought about that.
Okay, so you spoke about how revenue is important. So sort of a two-part question. What are your thoughts on mostly B2C companies that basically don't have a revenue model and they seem to raise a lot of cash? So they just sort of, we have this thing, we have a gazillion users, we have no way to monetize them. What are your thoughts as an investor? And as an investor, what kind of KPIs impresses you?
So the first part of the question, I have no revenue model. I think the landscape's really changed. That was not a huge issue maybe 5 years ago. I think investors have really gotten a lot more stringent and they want to see some sort of plan to revenue right from day one. Even if you're not monetizing yet, what is your plan? Just because a lot of money was poured into these kinds of companies that weren't monetizing, and it turns out the users that were being acquired weren't valued nearly as much as they thought they would be, right? So things have gotten a little bit more conservative. What was the second part of your question? I'm sorry, I forgot.
So the second part is, as an investor, what kind of KPIs do you sort of set?
So at the early stage, one of the big KPIs we look at is the weekly, monthly growth. So we're less concerned about actual numbers and we're more concerned about what was your revenue last week and what is it this week? Or what was your user base last week and what is it this week? And that's really giving us an indication that you're you hit the flywheel, you've really found your product market fit and people are just chomping at the bit to, to utilize your service or product. Go ahead. Yeah, it's okay.
So I advise a couple really early stage startups, and I'm wondering if you have any favorite resources for women and underrepresented minority startups.
In terms of just
like, are there
advice,
funds
mentorship?
that are really dedicated to that space?
Yep.
Or are there grants that you're aware of that are really great?
Yeah, so there's a few new funds that have kicked off in Canada for women specifically. I know there's the Stand Up Ventures that launched. I think the BDC has a Women in Tech fund. Go for it.
I'll try to remember.
Yeah. So Stand Up Ventures, Women, BDC's Women in Tech Fund. Dreammaker Ventures is another new
Right.
fund.
I have women.
That's the stand-up.
Oh, that's.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Dreammaker, I think, is focused on both women and minorities. And this is Canada, and the US has a ton. I think a lot of people, I mean, there's been a lot of research that underrepresented groups perform the same, if not better, than sort of the traditional. So I think a lot of funds are actually putting their thesis on that. So yes, there are a lot of resources for sure.
Would your advice be to sort of look at the States as a primary source of funding in that case?
They could start in Canada as well. I think a lot of funds have come under fire lately because of the lack of diversity amongst their teams and amongst their investments. And so I think they're all making a conscious effort to open up their deal flow and to really honestly take a look at companies that they may not have had former exposure to, including female-led, minority-led. So it may be advantageous to these startups to just approach the regular funds because, like I said, they're all trying to diversify their portfolios. They all realize the benefit and the power of diversity. And so, you know, it's a good time. I honestly think it's, you know, if something's working in your favor, ride it and work with it, right? So I think even if they went to just regular funds and not the women-specific ones, I think they'd be surprised at the response that they got.
Yes?
I'm on my 8th startup, so
Good for
I
you.
live the dream a lot. But I coach a lot of new startup CEOs, and they're always shocked. And I had one come in to see me yesterday. Her eyes were wide open. She just got a $1.1 million contract. She has to hire people, employment agreements, and you could see that founder stress kind of hitting her. And she said, "Well, I didn't sleep last night." I said, "Well, get used to it, because this is what being a startup CEO is like, and it's going to continue to go on. The problems will change, but they'll never stop coming." So how much, as a VC, how much do you get involved in coaching these founders on what they need to be prepared for? Because work-life balance should not exist in a startup CEO when it comes to an investor. And, it's just they can face a lot of anxiety when they see it for the first time.
For sure. You know what, it really depends on the investor and the makeup of their fund, how many investments they're making per year, how much time they're dedicating to existing versus new. For me personally, we're so focused on new investments, we don't have the time always to do the one-on-one coaching, but we have a very robust platform. So in our case, we connect founders with one another. Honestly, that's sometimes the best. We have almost 3,000 and up founders in our portfolio, and they're all able to connect with one another and just share things like this and reach out for support. But obviously, if a founder was to you know, proactively reach out and say, "I need help with this," we'd never turn them away, or we try to point them towards someone who could help, an advisor or other individuals.
Yeah, I completely agree with having CEOs connected to other CEOs.
It's very powerful.
Because you're at the top of the pyramid, so you don't have anyone to talk to.
Yeah.
So it's better to talk to other CEOs.
Do you, Marylin, have like a founder forum or something?
Well, in Kitchener-Waterloo, there is like a CEO group where we can't go to anyone else with our problems. We can't talk to our loved ones, can't scare our team, so just by myself. That's it. And it's like kind of like a strict, nothing goes beyond these doors. And yeah, people go through a lot of hard times, and there's a lot riding on their shoulders. So I would, encouraging kind of groups. And yeah, there's a lot of community groups as well. I know.
In a practical sense too, my last exit, I got an extra at least $5 million because I had that network of CEOs to help me with my term sheet.
Right.
So
that's right.
It's not just about, you know, supporting each other mentally, but it can actually pay a great benefit to you down the road too.
It's great.
That's right.
Yes.
What do you see as a major red flag for just rejecting ideas as a venture capital fund?
A red flag? Can you
say a negative thing which makes you think no, we wouldn't invest?
Oh, why we wouldn't invest? Attitude. Usually the biggest one, because it's, like I said, it's a very personal, it's a very relationship-driven industry. So if there's somebody who's just got the wrong attitude, you don't want to work with them. Unless It's like, you know, Stuart Butterfield or someone. Fine. Yeah, but
I think-
basically.
All right, I think we have,
Sorry, and any financial metrics which you would make you think, oh no, we will go ahead?
It's so case by case driven. It's hard to, it's hard to pinpoint one. But we can talk more about it after if you'd like. Yeah, you're welcome.
all right, I think we have time for one last question.
Do you find that Canadian investor risk appetite for tech startups has improved over the recent years, or are companies and entrepreneurs mostly going to U.S. VC funds? And if so, how can Canadian VC funds improve and kind of invest more in tech startups?
I actually think appetite for risk is not, I talked about how there's not enough money being thrown at the top of the funnel. I think the money that is at the top of the funnel, though, is actually willing to take quite a bit of risk. I think because a lot of the angels at the top of the funnel, you're now starting to see folks that have made money off companies like Shopify, and they're opening their own funds or starting to deploy their own capital, and they're willing to bet on founders that are taking more risk, right? So I think you are seeing a lot more of that. And in terms of our companies going more to the US, I think the opposite's happening. A lot of US investors are coming up here now. I mean, case in point, right? I'm sitting here on behalf of a US fund, and particularly at like the seed Series A level, US investors are all over the Canadian market. And so the Canadian investors are having to now compete with them as well to get into deals.
All right, we have time for one last question over here.
Sir? Yeah. Question for Marylin. As a company that's in the AI space, it's moving pretty fast. How much of a threat do you see? Because if I understand correctly, your companies focus on a particular niche. How do you see the threat of companies that are already providing software solutions in that particular niche, but maybe not as focused on AI? As AI becomes more commonplace, and do you see that as a threat? How do you stay competitive in that scenario?
So I think, well, the niche I guess you're talking about is robotics, right? So yeah, there's, in manufacturing, there are a lot of traditional automation kind of that's in there, kind of the large cage robots kind of in the sensor. So so I think where we come into play is we make automation, robotic automation, much more adaptable. So before you kind of have to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in this one piece of equipment or machine that does one thing really well repetitively, and it can't do anything else. So we kind of bring flexibility to that. So a lot of the times business demands are different from this week to the next. You need someone here in this line next week, you need to move them somewhere else. So so in terms of AI, I think that's what the new direction that it's bringing to traditional automation is that it's much more flexible, adaptive, making it much more affordable as well, because then now you can apply the same equipment to a variety of different scenarios. And what we're trying to do is make it as user intuitive as possible by making it kind of like how you would speak to a person. So it's a chatbot interface. So you would ask it to please do this and that instead of having to program. So I think AI will continue to transform that sector quite significantly over the next decade, and will so beyond that, that's why we kind of picked that niche. And I think in other sectors as well, AI kind of will replace other existing processes or optimize it. But I think in automation particularly, it's there's just a lot of growth and innovation that could help take us from a kind of essentially help all of our facilities become more productive. And we kind of already see that in other facilities across the world. Kind of Canada is a little bit behind in this. Even if you look to the US, our neighbors, they're much quicker to the adoption of innovation. So yeah.
All right, so your time is valuable. Thank you for joining us. Our speaker's time is valuable. Thank you for joining us and taking time out of your day. I got a hot tip from a close friend of ours who works at North about what to get for you. So there's 2 bottles in here for you, Marylin.
Oh, wow.
Thank you very much for taking the time to come to
No
Toronto.
problem. It's my
Neha
pleasure.
Khera.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. If you can join me in a round of applause.
Thank you.